A year or so ago, I was doing a talk just before Brexit, and I was asked, when do you think we'll have another independence referendum? And I said, I don't see us having one until 2025 at the very, very earliest, maybe even later than that, because it's going to take us a long, long time to show why we need to have another independence referendum, despite the fact that we've been let down with all the promises that the unionist parties made in order to win that election, that referendum in 2014. We're now actually in the ridiculous situation where the only people that are being expected to respect the result of the 2014 referendum are the people who lost it. The people who won it have got absolutely no intentions whatsoever of respecting any of the promises and commitments that they made to the people of Scotland in order to secure a no vote. But then, of course, Brexit happened. And like so many people here, I expected that there would be, I expected the vote would be narrow, but I thought it would be 52-48 the other way about. I didn't expect it was going to be a vote for the people in England and Wales would vote to shoot themselves in the foot, to shoot Scotland in the head, and to put a bomb underneath the Irish peace process. And that's exactly what they did. And I watched the press conference the next day with Michael Gove and Boris Johnson. And they looked like two guilty schoolboys who'd nipped behind the bike sheds for a fag and had accidentally bummed the school down. Because all the way through the first independence referendum, and I really love saying the first independence referendum because it means we're having another. All the way through the first independence referendum, we were constantly asked what our plan B was. What's your plan B? What's your plan B? And I watched that press conference with Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, and it was obvious that they didn't have a plan A, never mind a plan B. And they were shocked, you know, and it really struck me that these are the broad shoulders of the United Kingdom that Scotland is constantly told that it needs to rely on. And these broad shoulders don't have a functioning brain on them. And I was really struck by the difference between this pair of utter clueless idiots who'd got into this referendum purely in order to further their own careers within the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson supported the Leave campaign because he wanted to become Prime Minister. Michael Gove supported the Leave campaign because he wanted to get back into the Tory cabinet. That was what it was all about for them. It was never about what was best for the country, it was about what was best for their careers. And I remember thinking about the contrast between them and Nicola Sturgeon the morning after a yes vote in a Scottish independence referendum. I mean, first of all, you'd have to haul her down off the ceiling. But she would have a plan. She would know what to say. She would say the right things to reassure people who'd voted no. She would say the right things to show people who'd voted yes that this was the journey that we were about to take, this journey of an ancient nation that was becoming a new state. Meanwhile, of course, the headline in the Scotsman newspaper would be "Blow for Nicola Sturgeon as SNP loses its raison d'etre." Because yes vote or no, some things are never going to change in independent Scotland. But I'm now more convinced than ever I was that we are going to become an independent country. All the way through the first independence referendum. All the way through the first independence referendum, I really wanted to believe, and there was days I even convinced myself, but there was always a wee niggly voice in the back of my head saying, you know, this is a big ask, I don't think we can do this, I don't know if we can. But now, this time, when we go into another independence referendum, we are no longer arguing about if Scotland should become an independent country. We are now talking about, the discussion now, the argument now is when should Scotland become an independent country? Because it is going to happen. And that's the only argument now that we have in Scottish politics. When is Scotland going to become an independent country? And we need to believe that, and we need to take that into our campaigning, and we need to have that confidence that comes of knowing that Scotland will become an independent nation, because we can then transmit that confidence to other people, people who are wavering, people who are undecided. A lesson I learned when I first got politicised during the 1980s in the campaign for lesbian and gay equality and HIV and AIDS awareness. And back then we didn't have legal equality, that's what we were fighting for. And the best advice I was ever given was by an old guy, an old gay guy who passed away with HIV some years later, and he told me that if you really believe that you're equal to anybody else, if you sincerely believe that you're in a struggle for equality, the first thing you need to do is to act as though you're equal. And that's a lesson that we need to take on board for the Scottish Independence Campaign. We need to know, we need to believe, we need to feel in our bones that Scotland is just as good as any other country. That we can do exactly what every other country on this planet does. And we do not need Westminster to look after us. Because that's the argument that the Unionists are going to come out with. They're always going to come out with the same story. It's always a variant of the too wee, too poor, too stupid. Although next time round it's going to be too wee, too poor, too stupid, too racist, it looks like. But I've been doing talks up and down the length of the country for the past year. I'm fully booked with lots more. And people are coming out to listen, to talk, to discuss independence. Because it is coming. It is coming. And occasionally there'll be a unionist plant in the audience, and you always know that they're a unionist plant because they always ask they always ask the same question, and that question is, what are you going to cut in order to pay for this massive deficit? Scotland we don't have a deficit in Scotland because we don't have an economy, as Robin McAlpine pointed out earlier on. We're constantly being asked to apologise for things that we don't have any control over. Scotland, it's not correct to talk about the Scottish economy. We should be talking about the United Kingdom economy in Scotland. And when people say to me, what about the deficit? What I always say to them is this. Think about all the advantages that Scotland has, the things that we take for granted. We've got an abundance of oil and gas. We've got so much in the way of energy resources that we can actually afford to have a national conversation about whether we want fracking, because we don't need it. We don't need to frack in this country. And that's not something that a lot of countries can afford to do, because a lot of countries, if they have got resources that are available through fracking, they have no choice but to exploit it. We don't in Scotland, because we have got an abundance of oil and gas from other sources. We've got 300 years worth of coal that we're going to leave in the ground because it's bad for the planet. We have got the greatest renewable energy potential for anywhere in Europe. We've got a quarter of the wind energy potential for the whole of the European Union. There's estimates that we could have as much as 40% of the tidal energy resources for the whole of Europe. And that's an energy resource that we're only beginning to exploit. We have got such an abundance of energy, which is the motor, the basis of any economy. It's embarrassing just how much we've got in the way of energy resources. And that's not where it ends, the advantages that Scotland's got. We've got 4 of the top universities in the top 100 in the world. We've got an educated English-speaking population, even those of us who come from Glasgow. We've got a £4 billion food and drink industry. We've got £3 billion of whisky exports, £1 billion of other food exports. We've got 60% of the fish catch for the entire United Kingdom, which in turn represents about 2/3 of the fish catch for the whole of the European Union. We are actually self-sufficient in food. The foodstuffs that we export make up for the foods that we import. We've got fertile soil. We have got so much in the way of fresh water, which is something that we don't think about this as being an advantage, but in countries like Greece, which we're always being compared to, or Spain, where I used to live and where the dog comes from, the local government had to spend millions on a desalination plant in order to ensure that there was enough fresh water for the local population. In Scotland, we've got so much in the way of fresh water, it falls out the sky in enormous quantities, that the Scots word for drought doesn't mean a shortage of water, because that just doesn't happen in Scotland. The Scots word druth means that you want a drink of alcohol. We've got a games industry here in Dundee. We've got an American historian recently wrote a book about how Scotland invented the modern world. we have got an amazing contribution in innovation and invention. And yet they're supposed to be a poor country. But our advantages don't end there. We're in a quiet, geopolitically stable part of the globe. No one wants to invade us. We don't want to invade anyone else. There are no large populations in some other country which want reunification with the Scottish motherland. We don't have territorial disputes. Not even Berwick. I've been there. It's a nice place, but we can keep it. So we've got all these massive advantages. In this country, we have such a respect for the democratic process that we are able to have an independence referendum. And in most countries, when the subject of independence comes up, it's conducted with bullets, and it's conducted with bombs, it's conducted with internment camps and disappearances and bodies being found in the street. The only casualty of the Scottish independence campaign was Jim Murphy's shirt. And that is an enormous testament to the democratic maturity of the people of Scotland, to the people of this country. We have got democratic institutions which function. People in this country, with the exception of Google and Facebook and Amazon, actually pay taxes. They don't in Greece. That's one of the reasons their economy is having so many problems, because people there don't pay tax. People here do. And yet, according to our unionist friends, Scotland is an economic basket case with the biggest deficit in Europe, and it's scarcely going to be capable of paying its own way in the world. And the obvious question to ask is, given all the huge advantages that Scotland has, if you wanted to list the ingredients for a prosperous, stable, peaceful, rich, democratic country, you would start off with Scotland's ingredients. And yet, this Westminster government has turned us, according to them, into an economic basket case. The obvious question is, whose fault is that then? Because the arguments that the unionists come out with about why Scotland shouldn't become independent are not arguments about Scotland. They're not an argument against Scottish independence. They're really an argument that we should run away from that Westminster that has screwed us up as fast as our hairy little Caledonian legs can carry us. And I'm more convinced than ever I was that we will become an independent country very, very soon. I'm convinced that this general election that's coming up will be the last Westminster general election in Scotland. And that's what we need to work towards. There's been a lot of arguments, especially amongst Yes supporters over the past few weeks about tactical voting and the best way to vote tactically, and should you vote till you balk and the local elections and how you should. Now, personally, I think that in the local elections that are coming, one of the difficulties we've got here is because we have different electoral strategy, different electoral systems in different elections, and that confuses people. So we need different tactics in each election. In the local elections, vote till you balk. Vote for your favourite pro-independence party first. Go all the way down the line and put the Tories last. Put them into last place. The tactics for the general election, if Westminster first past the post general election, are a lot simpler. Now, I've got a lot of time for the Greens. I've got a lot of time for the Socialists. But in this Westminster general election, any independence vote that isn't for the SNP is a wasted vote. And we need to maximise the SNP vote in the Westminster general election, because that's the only way that we can guarantee that we will have another independence referendum. We have to make sure that the Westminster establishment, that the Westminster media knows that the independence movement hasn't gone away, that we're not going to go away, that we will stay here and we will remain campaigning until we win, and we will win, and we will win. It will happen sooner rather than later. I wrote a blog article just at the end of the last independence referendum. It was on the day of the vote. I went down to George Square that day, and there was a fantastic atmosphere in the square. And it was just week or so after my partner had passed away, and it was just a week or so after the funeral. It was a kind of strange time for me. And I went down to the He Wants to Kill a Duck. I went down to George Square, and there was an amazing atmosphere, and you could almost touch this vision of a better Scotland that was just hovering there. It was so close, you could smell it and feel it and almost touch it. And I just had this terrible feeling of foreboding that we haven't done this. And I didn't want to put people on a downer, so I went back home, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon I sat down and I wrote a blog article called The Tide Goes Out. And what I was saying was that Scotland had changed in this independence referendum campaign. Scotland is a different country now than it was just a few years ago, because we've learned how to hope. We've learned what hope means. We've learned that it's something that we can do. And once you learn that, you never unlearn it. And that's what gave me a great strength. Even though I knew then that we'd lost that first independence referendum, because we'd learned how to hope. And that was a message that we would keep alive and we would keep going. And I wrote this blog article called The Tide Goes Out, saying that the tide comes in and the tide goes out, and it's up to us to keep the flame of hope alive in the storms and the gales that are about to hit us, but never ever forget that the tide will come back in again. And I put on the television, when this was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I wrote the blog article and I sat on it, and then I watched the election, the referendum result programme with the sound off, because it was Margaret Curran, my local MP, and I couldn't bear to listen to the triumphalism and the gloating. And I put the telly on, in silence, and at 3 o'clock in the morning I knew that we couldn't win. And I published the article, and I'm so proud of the fact that so many people have told me that they got a lot of strength and support from that on what was a very bad day for so many of us. And I'm often asked, had you written anything, some fine uplifting words, had you thought about something to say if Scotland had voted yes, if we'd voted to become an independent nation? Something to set us all up on this journey that we've all got ahead as a new country. And I was like, yeah, I knew exactly what I was going to say. I knew exactly what I was going to write if Scotland had voted yes. I was just going to write, you fucking dancer. And I'm keeping that in reserve, because I'll be writing that very soon. So that's really all I've got to say. So thank you all very much for listening.